Welcome to the 300 After Hours. This is when we kind of continue our conversation that we had at our study earlier, just a few minutes ago, actually. So Rick is with us tonight. Rick, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
And tonight you were up. You did the teaching tonight.
Yep.
So thank you for doing that.
Of course, my pleasure.
That always gives me a break, especially in my preaching weeks, like this week. So it was good to be able to take the night off and also to just sit and listen. I thought it was a great study, and we're in Ecclesiastes, right? And we went through chapter 2 tonight, verse 18 all the way through 26, right? I'm not going to read all of this, but the heading is the vanity of toil, right?
Yep.
So tell me just a brief summary of kind of like what stood out to you the most in that teaching.
What stood out to me the most from this teaching is the fact that I think it's incredible, especially nowadays where our culture can be so polarized that it's difficult to hold two truths at the same time. And what I liked about this is that you can acknowledge that this life is filled with trouble, that it is a life where you are spending your whole life working. Working's not a bad thing. It's a gift from God. It was given to us before the fall. But you spend your whole life working, and in that life, in that work, you can have frustration, trouble. But Solomon says, what are we to do with this? And he says that even though life is troublesome, we can still find joy in our work. We can still find joy in the food we eat and the things, and what we drink, and just in our own labor, that we can have a joy there. And that, specifically, that joy is from God, that it is from the hand of God that we can find enjoyment. And so I just love that idea of, wow, this life is hard and difficult, and I am going to work until the day that I die. But I can have a confidence knowing that because I'm saved in Christ and I walk with God by faith, that I can ask him for joy and to sustain me and to sustain that joy, and he will be faithful to do so.
Yeah.
So
that stood out to me too. I mean, as you were going through that, and really those words, sorrow and vexation.
yeah,
That there's this life is filled in our toil with sorrow, with vexation, with toil. And then, and so like when I feel that, I can go, hey, that's not just my bad attitude. The wisest man that ever lived said that, right?
Right.
So, that's this life. But in the midst of that there's a joy that can be found. So that really stood out to me as well. I found that very meaningful in the text. Your points tonight were, number one, everything must go, verses 18 and 19. Point number 2 was everything must go to someone else. And then point number 3 was everything is from God. So walk me through that just a little bit. Everything must go. What is the vanity or the meaningless in what he's seeing there or saying there in verses 18 and 19?
So, Solomon says essentially everything must go, that he's kind of recognizing, again, reflecting on, I'm going to die one day. What are the implications on my life? And the previous passage, he noticed, whether I've lived this life so wise, but I'm going to die just like the fool. And then he turns and looks at his life and he says, everything that I've worked for, it's all going to be gone. I can't take it. It must go to someone else. I can't take this with me into the afterlife, which is frustrating because I spent my entire life trying to get it and that I have it, which typically that's kind of how it goes in life. You don't get comfortable, or you don't meet your goals until, later in life. And then once you have them, you have maybe 20 or, 30 years to enjoy them.
Yeah.
And so, eventually he realizes it's vanity, that everything must go, everything you worked for. And then not only must it go, but it must go to someone else. And the frustration there is you don't know who that someone else is going to be. Are they going to be a wise man? Are they going to be a fool? Is it going to be well stewarded, or is it going to be squandered within the next generation? That's why I brought up the Lion King, because I think that's a great illustration of just in one generation, this luscious, fruitful place that, Mufasa had, just a generation later when Simba's an adult, it's barren. Nothing's left. Can't even hunt for animals there. And so everything, I thought it was good. It was,
good.
It was a good pop culture
Yeah,
reference.
no, it was good.
I had another back.
I would have probably done something from the Puritans or something.
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
and everyone would
Hey.
be like, well, I don't know what that is. And you're like, The Lion King. You're like, oh, everyone
Yep,
knows.
that's what I was so surprised because like, who's seen The Lion King? Everybody's like,
Do you know why? It sounded like you said, who has seen the light?
oh, who has
It
seen
didn't
The Lion?
sound like you said, who has seen the Lion King?
Oh,
It sounded like you said, who has seen the light? And everyone's like, I don't think I
don't
saw
think-
the light. I don't know.
I saw the light. Yeah, that's a no. So, yeah, I had a Batman Begins one in my pocket, but I didn't use that one.
Okay, so the fact that the realization that he can't take it with him,
Yeah.
and he's toiled for it,
Yeah.
and so everything's going to go.
Yeah,
And then also added to that, it's like almost he almost realizes this in stages.
yeah, right, exactly.
Like I
It's a
can't
buildup.
take it with me. Everything must go. Oh, that's bad. Ooh, it might not go to a wise person. Ooh, that's
Yeah.
even worse.
yeah,
Right.
right.
And then the final thing is that everything is from God. What was the point that you're making there? That's
So, like you said, it did seem to kind of layer
Mm-hmm.
upon itself, and it seems like Solomon kind of comes to a meltdown
Mm-hmm.
of a crisis of like, oh my gosh,
it's all
why have I spent my entire life working for this thing that's going to go to someone else who's going to ruin it?
Mm-hmm.
What was the point? And then the very next verse, he recognizes, that's not my place.
Mm-hmm.
What's good for a man is to eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his work.
Mm-hmm.
This I see is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can have enjoyment?
Yeah.
And so he kind of gets overwhelmed, and he says, I think he kind of says, it's not my place to worry about that thing, but I just need to enjoy the days that I do have and walk with God in them, because it is only from God that I'm going to have joy in these things.
Yeah.
This is the only thing I can have. It's like what Peter says to Jesus when Jesus looks at him and he says, okay, everybody's left. What are you guys going to do? Peter says, where else could I go?
Yeah.
With
Are
you
you
are the
gonna leave
words
all
of
stuff?
life.
He says,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Solomon kind of says, what good is it to worry? I simply must trust God because he's God.
Mm-hmm.
And then, kind of correlate that with Psalm 90 where Moses acknowledges the same thing. And he says, so what do his response to that reality is he prays to God and he asks him to do a work within him for his good. And so, everything is
Okay.
from God.
Yep.
The toil we have and the peace that we get in the midst of it.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I think probably personally to me, I think that he was probably walking through that when he looks at like, is what I have going to pass on to someone that's wise? I mean, obviously he had to have realized that like he had a great amount of wealth that was passed on to him from King David.
Right.
David passed on to him all of the wealth, and because he used it wisely, he used that wealth to build the temple.
Right.
But the realization that, and again, maybe he's looking at his offspring and not feeling as confident.
Yeah, maybe.
But just that realization that, well, I don't know that everyone will use like what I've strived for in the service of the Lord. Like that like he had done that, but maybe that might not be the heart
Right.
of the next generation. So
Yeah.
so that's neat. And he finds in all of that, he says, well, but that's not in my hands. Mine is to, find joy
Yeah.
in creating and building and saving and working
Yeah.
hard and eating and drinking
Yeah.
in life, right?
Right.
To find joy in that. We talked a little bit about legacies and like what does it look like
Yeah.
to build or to leave a legacy to future generations. I want to ask you something because, I think I shared a little bit at our table there about kind of how I viewed that. Is our responsibility, you think?
Yeah, I think it is our
Yeah.
responsibility, absolutely. Because, and this is kind of something I touched on during our conversations, is about the church.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, the church has been 2,000 years of one generation acknowledging that Christ has commanded us to go into all the nations, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That was given to the apostles who passed it on to the early church, and literally the rest is history.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it quite literally, as Christians, is our responsibility to pass on what we've inherited to the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's absolutely true. And you can draw just a direct line from, Jesus.
Right.
In Hebrews 1:1, in the last days, the revelation came through Christ.
Right.
Yeah. Came through him. And then he passed that on
Yeah.
to the apostles.
Right.
And they pass it on to us. And it's our responsibility. You see that next generation, even as Paul is speaking to Timothy, he's exhorting him to pass on what he had delivered to him, which had come from Christ, right? So it is it's like a giant relay race where you're passing on the baton, right? So we do have that responsibility, and we have to think about the next gen. I mean, that has to be meaningful to us, right? And so they're going to stand before God for what they do with that.
Right.
We're going to stand before God with what we do with our part. Right?
Yeah,
Have I given something to the next generation, and have I worked in my days? I'm finding joy in this, and in the toil and the struggle. I'm finding joy of this in the midst of that, and I am doing my part to pass something on.
Right.
You are going to be responsible with what I pass on.
Right.
And I know that was like a big thing. I shared at the table. That was a big thing to me. I think that, like, getting excited about leaving a legacy, or passing something on, I think you probably grow into that. I mean, I had to grow into that. As I was younger, it didn't mean that much to me.
Sure.
It means a lot more now, at 55. And there's things I shared, like when I create those soap videos, a lot of times those things, it takes a little bit, it takes several hours of study, and then I have to record it and I have to edit it. Oftentimes that's early morning editing.
Right.
And, I think last week my computer software crashed.
Oh,
and so
no
it's
kidding.
like re-downloading everything. And so you could do all that, and then you post the video. And then maybe I can look at like the views, at least on our church app, and you look at something and go, oh, wow, 14 people watched it.
All those hours.
Yeah, wow. And you have, like, there's a natural feeling. You're like, wow, man.
Yeah.
I don't know, is it worth it? But it is. It is to me, because I'm going to be gone.
Right.
I mean, hopefully later rather than sooner, but we never know. But
Sure.
I mean, at some point I'm going to be gone. And that little investment is it's going to live on, right? For a long time.
Right.
So some person I'm never even going to meet, if they want to sit down and like go verse by verse through Galatians or 1 Peter or 2 Peter, they're going to have that resource there.
Yeah.
That means something to me.
Right.
So I think it's important. It's important for us to recognize it is our responsibility, and then to grow in that responsibility as we get older.
Yeah.
And say that is a meaningful thing to me. I'm going to find joy in doing that.
No, and I think it's useful for, like, whether you're old or whether you're young. It's useful because I know in my generation and the generation that's coming up now, it's almost like we're in a place where it's like when you're just kind of really frustrated with something, and so you rage quit. Like you just, scribble the paper or whatever, put it down. You're like, that's it, I'm not going to touch it anymore. That's kind of the place where my generation and the generation coming up is, because so many people are just like, what's the point? Where's this all going? We live in a culture that no longer acknowledges God as our creator and as the one who is governing the universe and orchestrating history to occur in a way that pleases him. And so because we don't live that way, so many people are like Solomon, just quick to give up in despair. Like, what's the point? Well, if I can't guarantee that there's going to be a good thing that's going to come of my own life, then I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to quit. And if you're not producing, then you're just going to deteriorate. Like you're just going to go stagnant, and from there decline. And that's what we see going on in our culture. There's nothing new coming into existence in our culture. There's only what has been being destroyed, hoping something new will come along. But because we've abandoned God, and because we don't consider God, and like you were saying, of thinking there is an eternal significance, an eternal weight to the thing that I'm doing, so I'm going to invest in it wholeheartedly. There is none of that, and so there's no motivation to invest.
Yeah. I believe that that's very true of our culture. And I think, especially of young people, and and also particular to a capitalist society is it's easy in times of ease just to become consumers.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really where we fall now is when we get discouraged and we don't think about the future and we don't think about meaning and everything. What do we become? We become just consumers. We're just consuming things. We're not creating things.
Right.
There's no way you can be happy we weren't created to be just consumers.
Yeah.
We were created to create and to build and
Right.
to work, right? That work is going to come through because of the curse. It's going to come through thorns and thistles, but I
Right.
can still work and build and gather from the field. So we are supposed to be creating,
Yeah.
building,
Right.
working, toiling. That's our worship.
Yeah.
You know, and so we can find joy in that, and we need to do it, or we won't
Yeah.
find joy because we won't be happy as just being these beings that consume.
Right.
Right.
And
so,
and I think, it really to consider that this is something that Jesus Christ has given us to steward over the course of history. That is to make disciples of the nations. That's not just nothing. That's a big deal. And so if we can just lift our eyes up for 5 seconds and look around at where we're at in history, where we came from, specifically in the West, like we're built on Judeo-Christian values and beliefs. If we would just look up for a few seconds, just acknowledge where we've come from, then we'll go, oh, okay, I get it now. I see the trajectory. That's a good thing. Let's stay on that path. So yeah, I think that's important.
Yep. All right, that's good stuff. I think the final question there was, how does tonight's teaching help us or encourage us in terms of fear that we have about the future? I mean, to me, really, it is what we started on. That clearly, we see here that Solomon says that our days are filled with sorrow and vexation. But in spite of that sorrow and vexation, that for the worshiper of God, that there's a joy that can be found in the midst of sorrow and vexation.
Right.
And I think particularly to a young adult culture that in the sorrow and vexation would tend to want to just, I'm just going to satisfy myself, consume.
Right.
That they need to see, we need to see that like joy is not found there.
Right.
Like there's a joy that can be found in the midst of sorrow and vexation, but it's a joy of doing things, working, toiling, and finding joy in those things because you're doing it.
Right.
As to the Lord.
Yeah, looking outward instead of looking inward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a good word, Rick. Anything else or?
Anything else? For me, one of the biggest things was the fact that enjoyment is from God.
Yeah.
And Psalm 90, Moses cries out, "Satisfy us with your love in the morning. Teach us wisdom." These aren't just, wisdom is good, but it's not simply just, 12 rules for life or, do this and it'll go well for you. Don't do this and it will go well for you. But it's actually, wisdom is also a part of our relationship with God. That wisdom is teaching us, how does dependence on God help us to live fruitful lives, right? And so for me, that would be my encouragement to everybody who was here this evening or is listening to this or watching this video, listening to this, however you're listening or viewing, would be practice what Solomon talks about, walking humbly with God. And what Moses did, which was to cry out to God and ask him to do a work in you so that you would have that joy that they're both talking about in the midst of trouble. So that would be my encouragement for everybody.
There's joy with God.
Yeah.
Right? Walking through life with God, crying out to him.
Absolutely.
Outside of that, sorrow and vexation.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
In the midst of sorrow and vexation. Yeah.
Well, outside of doing that, there's sorrow and vexation. But in the midst of that, if with God, find joy. That's good. That's a good word. All right. Well, I think we'll stop there. Again, thank you, Rick, for stepping in tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Going through the word there with us. And thank you for giving me the break as well. And thank you all for joining us here. And God bless you as you head into this week. And find joy in the Lord this week amidst the sorrow and vexation.
Amen.
Walk with the Lord, cry out to him daily. And we'll see you again next week at the same time.